Studio series. It's a pleasure to have you here. This is the first time, the inaugural one in the first series, and we have Professor Malcolm Toft here talking with us today. This is the Trident Studio series. So Tract, for those of you who don't know, is an 8-track social recording studio on your iPhone. It allows you to sketch your song ideas down on the fly and collaborate with other musicians and artists and songwriters around the world. We are running the Trident series to celebrate the Trident legacy. Trident Studios was founded in 1968 by brothers Norman and Barry Sheffield. I am going to introduce now our host for the evening, Mr. Adam Richards, who is Tract producer-in-chief and also head of music at Bridgend College in South Wales. Welcome, Adam.
Hello. How are we doing? All right?
Not bad, mate. Not bad. How are you?
Yeah, very well, thank you. Looking forward to tonight.
Excellent. Okay, without further ado, I'm going to say goodbye for now, and I'll let you introduce today's session.
Yeah. Is Malcolm coming in as well, just to have a quick chat?
He is. Welcome, everybody, to Malcolm Toft, who's on the line. There we go.
Hi, everybody. Nice to see you all. Looking forward to tonight, as Adam says. So, yeah, looking forward to it.
Just before we start, Malcolm, Grant, can we add Russell in to just talk a little bit about Tract?
Just invited him in now. Wait there a second.
Okay, brilliant stuff. Excellent. Well, Russell's coming in, guys. I just thought I'd just say a big warm welcome to have Malcolm Toft with us tonight with the Tract Trident team. You know, his legacy from Trident Studios, being the head engineer, working with the likes of David Bowie, the Beatles, T-Rex, James Taylor. You know, I'm really, really jealous of your resume. I'm not going to lie. Also, all the studios that you've worked in as well. You know, earlier on, you just telling me about working with Paul Weller. Wow, you know, it's amazing. So I'm really looking forward to this next hour, you know, having some good discussions with you. So excellent.
Likewise, yeah.
I think Russell's not come on yet, so I'll bring him in when he is.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, so Malcolm, we're just going to start off then with just a couple of questions we've got for you from the Tract team, and then we're going to open it up then to a bit of the audience. So thank you everyone for joining us today. How did you get employed by Trident, and tell us a little bit about working with the Sheffield Brothers?
Well, it's quite an interesting story, actually, because I was working at CBS Studios in London in their second studio, and I couldn't sort of move up the tree. It was sort of dead man's shoes getting into the main studio, and we were only 4-track at that time, as most of the studios were. And there was this rumor went out that there was this new studio opening with 8-track, and we thought, wow, 8 tracks, you know, that's absolutely incredible. And one of the guys there got an invite to come along to go to the opening party. And I kind of wasn't going to go. I thought, oh, should I go? Should I go? And I thought, well, no, you know, at that time, there were very few independent studios opening up. So I thought, well, if I don't go, you know, I'll not see what it's all about. And there had been a rumor that they were looking for an engineer, that they'd been casting around and hadn't yet found someone. So it was kind of way in the back of my mind, if you like. And when I got there, it was in just off Wardour Street in the centre of Soho, and the place was absolutely rammed. You know, people queuing to get in and everything else. And I went into the control room, and there was this console there that looked like a starship. You know, it had 8 meters across the front of it. I thought, wow, you know, never seen anything like this before. And there was this guy there in the control room. It was only myself and I think a couple of other people. And he was really well spoken. He was, how do you like our new studio? It's jolly good, isn't it? And I thought, crikey, you know, it's not really my cup of tea, being a South London boy. It turned out his name was Robert Iggledon, and he was actually one of the backers of Trident Studio. So anyway, so I sort of, we kind of migrated around, and we ended up in there on the second floor in what was the preview theatre, because being in the centre of Soho, they'd opened up a facility where people could preview films, because it was another, you know, string to their bow. So they had this preview theatre. And I ended up, you know, milling around, and I bumped into Barry Sheffield. and I didn't sort of know who he was. He just said, I'm Barry. This was quite early on in the evening, and he said, "What do you do?" And I said, "Oh, I'm an engineer at CBS Studios." So he said, "Oh, really?" Blah blah blah. And then we got chatting, and a couple of minutes later, he just out of the blue, and as I say, I was with another guy from CBS, and there were 2 or 3 of us, and he said, "Does anybody want a job?" And I sort of just went, like that. Thought absolutely nothing of it. Went home at about 8 o'clock. Went back to Surrey, to Kingston. I thought absolutely nothing of it, and apparently the thing went on till about 4 a.m. Barry got absolutely rattled, and it was a big party. And a few days later, I'm sorry if I'm making this lengthy, but it's quite interesting because about 3 days later, there was suddenly this phone call at the reception at CBS, and Ivy, the receptionist lady, took the call. She said, "Malcolm, it's a call for you. It's some guy called Barry." So, okay. So Barry was on the phone and he said, we met up at the opening party. Were you serious about that job? So I said, well, yeah, So he said, come over. And I went over there one evening, and it was Barry and Norman in the control room sitting behind this desk. And what I didn't know at the time was nobody really had much of a clue about it all. Barry was still, he'd been a radio and television engineer, I think done a little bit of engineering at Norman's studio that he had above a drum shop. And there was another guy called Ron Goodwin, who was, again, a TV service engineer, who was the maintenance man. And they sat me down and they put a tape up, and I can't for the life of me remember what it was. I was only 21, 22 years of age. Gave me a glass of wine, and I mixed this track. And they virtually said, "Right, you've got the job. When can you start?"
Wow.
And I've still got the letter from Norman offering me the job as a sound balance engineer at £1,250 a year.
It's way too much.
It was, because in those days I hadn't broken the £20 a week barrier. I hadn't broken the £1,000 a week barrier at CBS Studios. So, I was made up. And then I joined them, I think it was March or probably end of March 1968, and they opened the doors pretty well a week or two before I joined, and there was just myself, Barry Sheffield, Ron Goodwin, and a guy called Jerry Salisbury, who was an absolute character. Jerry was the gopher guy there. He would make you tea and toast at 3 a.m, or go and get you a set of guitar strings if you wanted it. And that was the ethos of Trident Studios. That was the whole point. It was so customer oriented. It was all about giving the customer what they wanted. Now, I learned later that Norman had been out to the American studios and see how they did it, and they were far more relaxed and friendly. Whereas over here, studios like Abbey Road, they had the white coats, you had to get a chitty to get a microphone out of the storeroom, and it was all very structured. And the thing about Trident was we were always very, very friendly and very open, But yeah, that's how I got the job. It was totally coincidental. And it was a gamble, to be honest with you, because none of us knew where it was going to go. It was a brand new studio. It could have folded after 2 weeks and I'd have been out of a job, And there were people saying 8-track would never work, and and yet in 4 months' time we'd recorded "Hey Jude," So
Amazing.
the rest of the
So what type of work hours were you doing back then, Malcolm?
Well, that was the thing, you see, because I was on this £1,250 a year, but there was overtime, which was like double time, I think it was, after midnight, and time and a half after 6 o'clock. And I was working 60, 70 hours, and in fact, for that reason, when I was, I think another year and a half later, I bought myself an Aston Martin.
Wow.
I bought myself a DB5, which in those days cost £1,800, which I still kept it. I was living at home with my mum and dad. I had disposable income. I wasn't married or anything else, living the single life. They were fantastic times, absolutely fantastic times.
And this is
fantastic. It was brilliant,
Yeah, it's great because this sort of brilliantly leads into our CEO of Tract, which has joined us, Russell Sheffield. Hello, Russell. Hello, Russell. Can you hear us?
I can see him.
I can see him. Oh,
he's gone. He's gone. He's clicking in and out. Oh, there he is. Russell.
Hi, Russell. I think your microphone is muted. It just said then.
2 1 2 1 2.
Yeah, I can hear you.
So I think he
Welcome,
can hear.
Russell. So Russell is the CEO for Tract. Do you want to say a little bit about that, Russell?
Don't think he can hear us. No.
No.
There's a
Oh,
problem.
there we are. He might drop in again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bit of tape dropping. Yeah.
Yeah. So what was it like working with all these amazing artists at Trident?
Oh, I mean, at that time, of course, a lot of them were unknown. We did Elton John's first album, and of course, Elton was an unknown. Bowie was a relatively unknown. I mean, he
got no audio.
He did Space Oddity at Trident Studios, which was a big breakthrough. I think the big thing for me, the most important thing for me, was meeting Tony Visconti, David Bowie, producer. And again, that was sort of one of those coincidental things that led to a lifetime friendship. Tony, I just started at Trident. Tony had just come over from America, been invited over by a guy called Denny Cordell, one of the record companies. Denny had met Tony in New York, and Tony came over, and he tried a few studios in London and wasn't terribly happy. He was working on the early Tyrannosaurus Rex stuff, and he'd heard about Trident and booked in. And I just happened. It was only myself and Barry Sheffield engineering at that time, and it was whoever was working got assigned for various jobs, and I got assigned to Tony, and we just got on very well. And I can always remember. Again, it's one of those moments that lives with you. I was downstairs setting up some microphones, and Tony came over the talkback, and he said, "Hey Mal, what star sign are you?" And I said, "I'm Taurus." And he said, "Well, so am I. We'll work together." And we did for 2-3 years after that. And Tony, bless his heart, credits me with teaching him how to engineer, which I did. And I gave him an award at the Music Producers Guild a few years ago.
I can't hear.
And he said that he credits myself and George Martin with being the biggest influences in his career, which was fantastic. But Tony was great, and we were learning together. We were all learning together, and the artists were fantastic to work with because they, even the artists that had made it was really nice. I mean, I worked with Paul McCartney. I recorded a record called "Those Were the Days," which Tony Visconti reminded me. I didn't know this only a few months back, that apparently it's the only record that Paul McCartney ever produced. Apparently, it was on his sort of bucket list to produce something, and he produced this record by Mary Hopkin called "Those Were the Days," which actually knocked "Hey Jude" off the #1 spot.
Really? No way.
With Paul McCartney, and Paul was lovely. He poured me a glass of beer, and was very friendly, very, very professional. You got on, you did the job, but he was absolutely lovely, and everybody was. I don't think the worst people to work with were the people that hadn't made it, and the producers that didn't know what they were doing. The producers who knew what they were doing, and the artists who were already halfway there, they were absolutely lovely to work with. I mean, you had to be, there's a lot of concentration. You had to be on top of your game all the time, because if you, with those days with tape, you had no edit it, no sort of redo it. There's no redo button at all. If you missed a track, you missed a track, and that was it. So
did you have any disaster for that?
Sorry?
Did you have any disaster?
Barry Sheffield had one disaster. He put a microphone. I forget what the song was. It was quite a major song. He put a mic down, which of course has got a magnet inside it. It was a dynamic mic. He put a microphone. I think it was a ribbon mic, so it's got a huge magnet in it, on top of one of the tape boxes, and he raised the drum tracks. And they had to reconstitute the drum. I think one of the tape ops got him out of the mire and reconstituted the drum tracks off of the tape.
Wow.
You could get the odd mistake. I mean, you could certainly drop in on the wrong track and stuff like that. You had to be really concentrating. And sometimes at 3 a.m, you'd be working long hours. It was quite grueling. It was.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
So one of my favorite records of all time, "Hey Jude," and I found out that you worked on that. I was just like, wow, that's massive. It's tell us a little bit about working, with a guy like the Beatles.
To be fair, the record was mainly recorded by Barry Sheffield. but Barry went on holiday, and they weren't happy with the mix. And one of the reasons for that is that there's this expletive on Hey Jude that not a lot of people know about, but it is there very strongly. And so I had to remix it, but we only had 8 tracks. So all I could do was try and bring the expletive down at the point where it came back in. But as far as I'm aware, I think they used my mix. I'm not sure, but I still mixed Hey Jude, so I can still lay claim to having done that. But it was 8 tracks, so you didn't have a lot of stuff you could play around with, but it had got really overdubbed a lot. And what had happened was this expletive had got lost and overdubbed and bounced, what we call bounce, when you mix tracks together and add them onto other tracks to create space. And it got, amazingly, no one had picked it up. No one had picked it up until the final mix, that this expletive was in the it was actually on the vocal track, so it couldn't be taken out. Yeah.
So technically, that, Malcolm, with that mixer you had to do with Hey Jude, so you had to mix it down to 8 tracks. So did you have loads of stems on the desk? Did you have 2 tape machines synced up, or was it literally you had 8 tracks?
Well, this is the point. They'd done Sergeant Pepper at Abbey Road, and they were absolutely peed off because they had to use, because Sergeant Pepper was so advanced and so experimental, and they were doing all sorts of things with sound that people hadn't done before. And they were only 4-track at Abbey Road. And what they actually did, which sounds amazing now, but they actually had 2 4-track recorders, and they would punch the button and put them into record at the same time, and then hit playback at the same time. There was no synchronization. They just had to literally hit both buttons simultaneously when they were doing the mix. And it's a credit to the design of the machines that there wasn't any lag between the 2 machines. But they were so fed up with that, and Abbey Road missed a trick because people were going 8-track. We'd had 8-track for a few months. Abbey Road was going 8-track, but because it was so bureaucratic, the technicians there said, no, we're going to spend a year researching it, make sure it's all up to scratch before we actually put it into use. And of course, the Beatles couldn't wait. They wanted to record Hey Jude, and they said, and they'd heard about Trident and said, let's try Trident. And that's how we got to record Hey Jude. But it was a straightforward mix, down to 2, obviously,
Fab. And I suppose that goes on to a little point that actually I just remembered that Russell said to me many years ago, right, and which, with a little bit of swearing that's still in that recording, in Hey Jude. Tell us a little bit about that, Malcolm. I'll get Grant to put it together now to see if you can play it out for everyone.
Yeah, if Grant can play it back, that would be really good. But it's about 2 minutes and 50 seconds into the song, and it's after the verse starts, and I think it's Lennon singing. It says, "Don't let her under your skin," and after the word "skin," you hear this little whoa, and then you hear "fucking hell," and what it was that they were friendly with a band called Grapefruit, and there was singer with the band was a guy called John Perry, and he was a great friend of the Beatles. And they were recording late one night, doing vocal backings and whatever. And they'd been there for about 10 hours already. They maybe had some certain substances that smoke, and they, as a consequence, when you get tired and those sort of things happen, your hearing starts to diminish. So the headphones have been turned louder and louder and louder. So John Perry came into the studio. John Lennon beckoned him down to come and join in the vocals. John picked up a pair of headphones that were on the floor, put them on, and went, "Whoa, fucking hell," and threw them on the floor. And that got picked up by the microphone. Fantastic. And then that track got bounced with other tracks and ended up on the main vocal track, and it's there, And whenever I point it out to people, they go, I mean, I've been interviewed on the radio and all sorts of different things, and people go, "Do you know what? I never knew that was on there. I've listened to it, hundreds of times." I was at Paul Weller Studios last year doing some tutorial videos, and Paul's a great Beatles fan, and we said, he said, "I've not heard that's expletive." And we played it back on the monitors in the control room. And he said, "Wow," he said, "I just thought that was some vocal backing." He said, "I never realized it. Now you point it out, I can hear it. And when you know it's there, you hear it all the time. You hear it in your car, you hear it on the radio. You know, you can't fail to miss it. So if you've got it queued up, Grant, you can.
I've queued it up now, so it's we're in. Punch in at 2 minutes 15 to Hey Jude. So here we go.
After Leather Under Your Skin. Just listen to After Leather Under Your Skin, and then you'll hear it.
Okay, here we go.
Remember to leather under your skin.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
There we go.
Excellent.
Yes, in a little while.
That's probably one of the first times
and
it's been an exclusive played on Radio 1 before they even realised it. It went on and on and on.
Well, here's the funny thing, right? It was played on Radio 1 in July, I think it was August 1968. And there was a DJ on there, Scottish DJ, and what was his name? Can't think of his name now. And he said, he thought it was John Lennon. He said, John Lennon swears on this record, you know. And we thought, I remember it was in my car and I heard it. And Henry, his name was it John Henry, DJ? Scottish guy, as I say. And and he said, John Lennon swears on this record. And I thought, oh my God, you know, they're going to withdraw all the singles. It's going to be an absolute nightmare. But nobody ever since then has mentioned it. And it's their biggest selling number one, you know.
Brilliant.
And the irony of it is, by the way, that those were the days that I recorded with Mary Hopkin, knocked Hey Jude off the number one spot. So we had two number ones.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. You're all right, Russell?
I'm here.
Yes, brilliant.
Technology.
Okay, so Russell is the CEO of this amazing app called Tract. Do you just want to say a couple of words, Russell, before we get on to the next question?
Yeah. Hello, everybody. Sorry about the slight technical problem getting hooked up there. My Mac just didn't like it. Thank you ever so much for tuning in and joining our sessions. I want to thank Grant and Adam and Malcolm, obviously, for putting this all together. It's an amazing, hopefully, start to something really big that we're going to do is to tell you about our history and how we got here and the ethos behind Tract. And the reason why we've invited Malcolm particularly to come and tell his story tonight is to give you a bit of the background. And I'm very proud to say that Malcolm's a very long-standing friend of mine. And you may have heard already from the beginning of this chat that obviously Malcolm worked with my dad at Trident Studios. My dad was one of two brothers, Barry and Norman Sheffield. My dad was Norman. My dad was very successful as a drummer in a band called The Hunters and touring with Cliff Richard and playing with Cliff. And it was his idea behind the studio, the fact that actually, you know, as working as a musician at Trident Studio at Abbey Road, he felt, as Malcolm said a minute ago, that it was all run by white coats and labs, and the mental attitude was that of, you know, you couldn't do anything experimental. So that's why when it formed Trident, was to build this place where people could experiment and do amazing things. And we're all lucky to be living with that music talent that's around us to this day. And every day I turn on the radio or I listen to a stream and there's a piece of work that was done at Dad's place. So that's pretty cool. And Malcolm had a huge part in that whole story. So it was only natural for me as a sort of artist and musician myself, when I came up with the idea behind Tract, that, you know, we wanted to build an artist sketch pad for musicians to put their ideas together and collaborate around the world. But I thought, well, there's only one person I'm going to have to ask first to get involved in this project and give it the seal of authenticity and understand, thank you, that what it's all about and how we make sure that what we are proposing to build is fit for purpose. And I wanted to make sure that the Tract came out of the door with the same reputation that my dad did with Trident Studios. And in order to do that, I needed to bring the right people into play. And I'm very lucky to count, as I say, Adam and Grant and all the team we have in Tract are helping shape this vision of taking Trident into the current century, what we're at now. And Malcolm was probably one of the first people that I actually rang and said, Malcolm, I'm thinking about doing this idea. I want the audio to sound incredible. It has to sound as good as the stuff came out of Trident. And that was the start of it. And Malcolm is on our advisory board and is a very big part of the new version of the app that's coming out. And without further ado, I'm going to leave you to talk because you're not here for me. But please do reach out, speak to Grant, speak to us guys. Tract is only as good as the people working in it. And that's you guys. So please stay connected, keep us posted. And thank you for tuning in.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Russell.
Yeah, well done, Russell. Yeah, I think something actually quite important to mention is that back in those days, there was what people obviously these days don't quite understand is that there wasn't the longevity that there is now. You know, when in the 60s and the late 60s, rock and roll and popular music had only been around really since the mid 50s. So we're talking 12 years. There weren't the different genres of music. You know, soul, R&B were the same. They were the blues. You know, that you didn't have all these different genres of music, and you didn't have longevity. And what you got to remember also is great artists like Elvis Presley, who was the king of the whole thing. He went into the doldrums. You know, his career faltered. He didn't continue with his career, and so everybody in those days, you know, me included, we all thought that artists had a short lifespan. You know, you got in, you made your record, you had a hit record, you then maybe did some cabaret for a few years. I mean, there was that classic quote from Ringo Starr in the early days of the Beatles, and somebody said, "What do you want to get out of this, Ringo?" And he said, "Well, if I make enough money to open a hairdresser's in Liverpool, I'll be more than happy." And that was people's aspirations. Yeah. You know, that was people's aspirations. So we weren't looking at people like Elton John and David Bowie and Mark Bolan and you know, all the people that were around that time, James Taylor. We weren't looking at them having, even the Beatles were starting to break up, you know, and I think even the Beatles thought, well, maybe after 4 or 5 years people will forget about us, because there wasn't that longevity. Nobody had a 30-year career in music or even a 20-year career in music. You know, so people say to me, "Why haven't you got photos of you with David Bowie? Why haven't you got photos of you with Elton John?" In those days, you did not, as an engineer, you know, a technician, you did not ask the artist to have a photo taken. You simply didn't do it. The only photos there are of me at the studio were taken by magazines. But also, of course, I didn't know that I'd be able to say to my children, you know, 40, 50 years on, I work with David Bowie, and they know who I was talking about. So, you know, this is something that actually people don't really understand. You know, they don't. It's difficult, and I totally get it. But the world was a very different place, and I'm proud to, you know that in those days we were actually shaping the future of music. You know, and these artists, I mean, that have had that longevity. You know, I worked with Rod Stewart again. All these people that had incredible careers who have just lasted the test of time, and that says a lot about the music. And I have to say also that Trident shaped music probably, I feel, more than the Abbey Roads of this world, because Abbey Road's famous for the Beatles, and that's pretty well it. You know, we did Walk on the Wild Side, we did Elton John's first 2 or 3 albums, we did Space Oddity, we did the Space Oddity album, we did James Taylor's first album, we discovered Queen, for goodness sake. You know, how much more do you want? You know, and the legacy of Trident is incredible, and that's why I still try to, you know, to promote the Trident legacy as much as I possibly can, because I'm so proud to have been there at that time. You know, I really am.
You know, it sort of like goes with the classic sort of like the studios that have done really well over the years, like Stax Records back in the day. You know, it's similar sort of sense that the studio had a particular sound, but they also had other things going on as well. Like they might have had a record company and managers part of it, and you know, and I think, you know, and that's sort of, and one of the biggest things that for me anyway with Trident Studios, that being from the technical side as well as the musician side, is the desk, is that A-range console, and you know, and how Trident Audio started. Can you tell us a bit about that, Malcolm?
Well, yeah, I mean that came about. I mean, I'd always thought that my career path would be to open my own studio, to be honest with you. I'd always thought that's what I really wanted to do. I didn't want to become a producer like so many engineers did. I just didn't see that as my way forward. So I'm thinking, well, I don't want to be a recording engineer, you know, can't be a recording engineer into my sort of 50s. Where do I see myself? And of course, in those days, independent studios were very successful. Recording studios as a commercial entity were very, very successful. So I'd always thought that I wanted to open my own studio. And look, before I even joined Trident, I'd started to build consoles. I've got a clipping actually from a local newspaper when I was 17, when I cobbled together 6 Dulce preamps from Italy to make a mixing console in my front room at home and record
Wow.
local bands. I'd always been interested in that side of it. And I always felt as a recording engineer, I make the analogy with a racing driver, you know, a racing driver has to have some idea of what's going on under the hood. He can't just go into the pits and say, well, something wrong with the brakes. He's got to know that it's brake temperature, that it's the left caliper causing a problem or whatever. He's got to understand a bit about the technology. And I could never understand engineers, a lot of whom wanted to be producers, just saw engineering as a step up and didn't really understand what the console did and how the system flowed through it and how things connected together. So I'd always been interested in that side of things. And I was always in the background, sort of tinkering around, building my own console, playing around. And Barry and Norman made me manager of the studios. My chair got taken over by Roy Thomas Baker, who rather famously produced Bohemian Rhapsody. And Roy took over from me, and I became studio manager. And after about 6 months, we wanted a new recording console. And we weren't happy with the Sound Techniques consoles that were in the studio. There were various issues. And we were looking around for another console. And by that time, of course, we were very prestigious. So a lot of the manufacturers wanted to work with us. So we went to see Neve. We went to see a company called Kodak. We went to see a company called Helios to get a new console. Now, we were going 24-track. We were one of the first studios, again, to go 24-track. And what we found was that none of the people we went to could provide the facilities that we wanted. And one of the things that we wanted, which was Roy Thomas Baker, he quite rightly said, we used to get tapes in from America, and they were on the NAB characteristic, how the tapes were lined up. And we were Europeans, CCIR, Committee Consultative International des Radio, which is a French standard. And if you put an American tape onto an English machine that had been calibrated for CCIR, the frequency response was out. It was wrong. So very often we'd get a client into the studio, bring his tape in from another studio and just say, oh, can you just play this back? And we play it back on our monitor section, and of course it would be wrong. So they'd have to plug it up through channels, change all the EQ to compensate it, or else completely realign the tape machine, which was a lengthy job. So Roy Thomas Baker said, look, if you're, thinking about getting another desk, could we please have some EQ on the monitor section so that we can do this adjustment? Well, Barry and I remember this, we went around talking to various manufacturers. And the major one, I think the turning point was we went to see Neve and Co. in Cambridge. And we sat around a big table with all their top engineers, because we were very prestigious then and they wanted to work with us. We sat around with all their engineers. And we said, right, we want EQ on the monitor section. We want 24 tracks. We want this, we want that. And none of them had ever worked a console in their life. They were all electronic engineers. They were all technical people. None of them questioned and said, why do you want the talkback over there? Why do you want EQ on the monitor section? It was like, oh, can we modify this module? Can we do this? Can we do that? And they didn't do 24 track. They only had 16 tracks. And another problem we had at Trident was a major one, which was didn't have much space in the control room. Our control room was quite small, and we had the console across the width of it, and we had a lift housing in the corner. So we actually only had 5 feet of space to get the console into that area. Wow. So we had to have a separate patch bay as well. So we wanted a lot. We wanted at least 24 inputs. We wanted a 24-track monitor section. Wanted all these facilities, and they couldn't provide us. And really, Neve were our last sort of hope, to be honest with you. And I can remember this. I remember it to this day. Barry and I were driving back from Cambridge after this meeting, and we'd been wined and dined, and we were both quite quiet because we thought, crikey, what do we do? And Barry said, I don't know, Malcolm. I can't see this console being. I can't see it fitting. I can't see it having the facilities. What do you think? So I was 24 years of age by this time, 25, and had the bravado of a youngster at that age. And I said to Barry, look, I think we might be able to build our own console, because whilst I've been tinkering with this console, there was a maintenance engineer at Trident Studios called Barry Porter. And Barry knew quite a lot about circuitry, and I'd been bouncing ideas off him, and he'd been giving me some input to build my own little console. So I thought, well, Barry's got the technical knowledge, we know the systems. I'm a recording engineer. it's conceivable we could build our own console because I don't know what the other choice is. So I said to Barry on the journey back, I said, look, Barry, I think we could maybe build our own console. You know, I think it's worth a punt. What do you think? So Barry said, do you think so? And I said, how are we going to do it? And I said, well, I've got Barry Porter. He's quite good in electronics. And Barry Sheffield didn't really know Barry that well. He said, do you think so? So he said, yeah, I think so. I think he could do it. So they put their faith in me. And we had a lunch. And basically, Barry and Norman said to me, look, Malcolm, we trust you. We're going to put our faith in you. We're going to give you a year to design and build a new console. And it's on your head, and if you want to use Barry Porter, that's fine, but you're the guy leading the project. So that's how it started. And I went off into a room on the top floor with Barry Porter, and we sat there and I designed all the systems, all the system flows, talked to obviously the engineers about what they wanted, but I came up with the idea of the slide faders on the channels and all this kind of stuff. And we incorporated Roy's EQ on the monitor section. And then we would build a little bit of an EQ and get the engineers to have a listen to it. And Roy would say, oh, darling, I think it needs a bit more zhush on the top end, And I'd go away and play around with it and come back and give him another prototype. So it was a collaborative effort, in terms of how the EQ sort of went together, and I would work with Barry, interpret what the engineers and myself wanted to get it, and that's how we built the A range. And I laid out all the printed circuit boards. We got another guy in called Willie, who was a friend of Barry Sheffield, who did the mechanical drawings. And I mean, I can't, thinking of it now, to build a console that sophisticated with all the facilities that it had, plus the fact that the first session we ever used it on, after we'd worked all night to get it finished, was an Elton John session.
No way. What's your test session? Elton John test session.
So, and we go and use it on the first session. Have to say that the session had to be aborted, and we couldn't use it. We had to get it working. And then what happened was that as we've been building the console, various people, who use the studios, like John Congus, who wrote He's Gonna Step on You, Happy Mondays now did. I'd worked with him in the studio. Chipping Norton studios are opening up with the Vernon brothers, and they knew Roy Thomas Baker, and it had been mentioned to them, oh, Trident are messing around doing a console. So they came and saw me and they said, oh, Malcolm, you here you're building a console. Have you got anything that could suit us? Well, I adapted the console that I've been building for myself at home. For them, and I called it the B range, and that's how the B range, the Trident A range and the B range came about. The A range was for Trident Studios. The B range was a derivation from a console that actually I've been building for myself. And then the Vernon brothers unbelievably said, yeah, we'd like to buy one. So did John Congus. He said we'd like to buy one. So I went back to Barry and Norman and I said, look, I think we've got the possibility of making a company out of it. And to be honest with you, I think Barry and Norman were quite pleased because they didn't know what to do with me by this stage. They sort of, where does Malcolm go from here? He's a trusted employee. Where does he go? So when I suggested it to them, they said, great, well, yeah. And they made me managing director of the company, and they had a facility over in North London, space in North London, to build these consoles. And we started up manufacturing in North London. Unfortunately, Barry only lasted about a year and a half, something like that, because he just didn't get up. Barry'd always had a problem meeting deadlines, and he had the typical engineer problem, if you like, that he would never finish a project. He'd never finish a circuit. We used to have lots of board meetings and say to Barry, when is this going to be finished? Oh, I've just got this new circuit I want to try. So, there was conflict, and Barry couldn't work to the deadline. So he left us after about a year and a half. But by that time, of course, the company started to grow momentum. And, I designed the Series 80 console. Again, I came up with all the concepts and the ideas and everything else. And then, we used electronics people and whatever. But I always had the concepts and the ideas for the products. And as manager director, guided the company as well. And we never knew Trident Audio was going to become as big as it did, to be honest with you. Again, it's all suck it and see, like all of the Trident stuff,
Yeah. So what is your favorite out of the two, Malcolm? A range or B range?
The A range was, that's an iconic console. We only built 13 of them. And the reason we didn't build any more was because it was a prototype. We built that first one as purely a prototype. There was no thought of it being a commercial venture at that time, so it was not engineered to be built in any sort of quantities. There was so much hand wiring on it, so much point-to-point wiring. You know, it was so expensive to build that really, you know, it couldn't be productionized. So we built as many as we could, and then of course integrated circuits came along, and so we were able to change that to integrated circuits, and that effectively A range became what was the TSM console. So if you like, the B range sort of evolved into the Series 80, and the Trident A range evolved into the TSM. But the A range being completely discrete ICs, inductive EQs, you know, it's got that, and loads of transformers, so it's got that legacy sound, you know. And people have got them, they change hands for hundreds of thousands of pounds, you know. I think there's still about 12 of them left. The original prototype from Trident, I think, got actually put into the skip. It's the only one that's not around.
It's amazing. So I think we should start getting into some of the questions now from the people that are watching, Grant. But first of all, Malcolm, there was a question I seen which touched on what I wanted to do. So
how you get started, weren't they?
It was Martina. Was what advice would you give someone who just started their career? And the reason I wanted to say that is because you've got this new course as well, which is all about recording. So if you could,
I mean, a lot of people have said to me, well, you know, Malcolm, you go back 50 odd years in the industry, and you've seen it all from 1/4-inch tape, which I have, 1/4-inch mono tape, up to doors with, you know, limitless number of tracks, and you know, you've got a legacy there. And I do see so much wrong information on the internet, so much disinformation, wrong information on YouTube, conflicting information from people. But I just thought, well, it's about time that, you know, I put some stuff out there that actually is what I've learned, and pass on what I've learned, and cut out the crap that's around a lot of it, you know. And the whole thing about these courses is to say you do not need to spend a lot of money on equipment. It's not about how much you spend on the equipment. It's the approach that you take and the practical side of you know, of doing it. It's that simple. It's all down to common sense. And unfortunately, a lot of people, because they don't have the knowledge and the training, they think that by buying an expensive piece of equipment, they will actually solve the problem that they've got. And unfortunately, you don't, because it's the old adage of garbage in, garbage out. And I have this simple edict, and it's an edict that anybody making recordings should follow. And it is simply this: you have to start off with the right instrument, properly tuned, in the right acoustic environment, with the right microphone for the job. Doesn't have to be an expensive one, just the right type of microphone for the job. If you get those things right, the rest of it, it doesn't matter whether you've got a recording console costing £100,000 or £1,000. The changes that you'll get, the difference that you'll get, will be very small. Because what you can't do, if it's not in there in the first place, you can't generate it afterwards. And I get quite amused. You know, I'm known for my EQ. When I record, I use very little EQ, because I make sure that the instrument sounds right in the studio to start with. I make sure I've got the right microphone. I make sure I've got it in the right place, you know. And then when you do that, you need very little help or enhancement. You don't need, if you've got to start EQing stuff, you've got it wrong somewhere else, basically. You can easily use EQ as an effect, of course you can. You can use it to sweeten, but it's only one of the ingredients. You've got to have the recipe right in the first place. So these courses are there's 25 different tutorials on this course. I recorded them at Paul Weller's studio, and with his engineer Charles. And the idea is just to impart this knowledge and say to people, look, this is an easy way to do it. You don't have to spend a lot of money. You don't have to spend a lot of time if you get these things right. Also explain a little bit of the technical side of it as well, what balance lines are about, why you use balancing, why you don't need to use balancing, you know, what phase is all about, phase cancellation, proximity effect, all the stuff if you want to know some of the technical stuff. But the emphasis is on simplicity and keeping it simple. And there are 25 tutorials. It's called allaboutrecording.com. It's £15 to give you complete access to all of them. And actually track members get a discount. They get a I think it's a 10% discount. No, 20% discount. I think it is.
Excellent.
So
Excellent.
yeah, I mean, I've done it really just to pass on, mainly to pass on the knowledge, but obviously it took a lot of time to do. But I was, I really enjoyed doing it. And I hope, I've looked on YouTube at a lot of these tutorials, and there's so much conflicting information, and people say the wrong things, and they don't have the right accent on certain elements that they should. It's like recording vocals at home. They'll talk about the microphone, and they talk about a pop shield, they talk about this, talk about that. Don't talk about anything about the fact that you need to acoustically treat a room. Doesn't matter what you're doing, you need to have some kind of acoustic treatment. And I show you ways of doing it really cheaply. You don't have to have, loads of expensive acoustic treatment. So yeah, and I enjoyed doing it. And I thought it was important to maybe pass it on now. But as far as getting, I think what she really wanted to know is how do you get started, and that's difficult. It really is, because the world's changed so much. There were far more opportunities when I came into it. Nowadays, getting started, if you want to become a recording engineer, it's a depleting market. The studios aren't there anymore. Of course, people can record at home. Recording has become far more democratized now. So I've always said this, that you could buy a piece of software and a Mac and have more power in equipment than we had back at Trident. It's that old adage of the computer in your watch is more powerful than the computer that got man to the moon. It's the same analogy. It really is, But of course, the danger is, and as I say, it's the same analogy. Give you someone the keys to a Ferrari and they don't know how to use it, and they've got all that power there, but they're going to have an accident. It's all about knowing how to manage the equipment that you've got, and that's where I think tried to distill this information. But getting into the business is very, very difficult. I think there's a lot of opportunities if you want to go into live sound, if you want to go into gaming, that kind of thing, if you want to go into film and television. But actually commercial recording is a very difficult field at the moment. Very difficult field.
I'm of the same mindset when it comes to simple recording. It's like you do see a lot of things where you're having 15 microphones on a drum kit and you've got like 8 microphones in a guitar cab, and honestly, it's like you can get better results by using less microphones and spending more time on the tuning and the placement.
That's the point. Absolutely right. I've seen engineers, go into a studio. They don't even listen to the drum kit. I mean, drums are the prime example. They don't listen to the drum kit. You stick up about 10 mics and then start adding compression and EQ and goodness knows what. And you go and listen to the drum kit and it's flabby and it's wrong, and it just, you say, well, look, just put a cigarette packet or, a bit of gaffer tape on top of the drum and tape it down, and you'll stop that ringing and you'll get a nice drum sound. And people just don't, rather use the technology. And the technology, you can't, as I say, take out, you can't take something out or put something in that isn't there already. You've got to start, it's garbage in, garbage out. It's obvious. It's obvious.
Yeah, definitely. So our challenge, our challenge then, to anybody here that's going to be recording in the next couple of months, try and record a drum kit with 6 microphones, okay? Or even 4.
Blimey, we used to do it with 3, standard.
With 3.
Overhead snare and bass drum. That's all you need.
Okay.
You'll get a good drum sound.
Yeah.
If you tune the drums properly, you'll get a great drum sound. You really will. I use a maximum of 6 mics on drums, absolute maximum. And that's only if I'm being posh and I want to mic up the hi-hat, and the toms individually.
Okay, so if you're going to use 6 microphones, Malcolm, what would you put them on? What instruments quickly?
Well, as I say, you'd have 2 overheads and pencil mics. Pencil mics are good for overheads because they're slightly bright. SM54 on the snare, something like that. Don't need much more than that on the top of the snare. So that's 3 of your mics. If you've got rack toms, you probably put 1 mic between the 2 rack toms. Mic on the tom, floor tom, mic on the bass drum. What's that? That's about 6 mics, isn't it?
Yeah. That's
a typical sort of setup. Can't see you needing any more. I really can't. And of course, the tom, nearly always I put the mic inside the drum. Most heads now have got the front taken off, so put it inside with maybe a blanket or something like that. But it's so important to listen to the snare, listen to the toms, to get the sound that you want, in the studio.
Brilliant.
It really is.
Cheers, Malcolm. Okay, so we got a couple of questions by here. We've had 2 votes on one of them, Grant.
Okay. Do you want to... Okay, you can see them. That was my question to you.
Yeah, I can see them. So, with modern times, do you think the focus is more on the artists than on the producers, who really put a lot of raw talent for the artist to perform to?
I think one of the problems, is that these days you can do anything. You can make anybody sound good. The accent these days is not on so much on talent. It's, does that person look right? You can craft a song around somebody. You can put them in tune. You can do just about anything. You take virtually anybody off the street, and you could comp them line by line with auto-tune and with training, and you could make them sound good. You could make them sound perfectly acceptable, give them a good song, and they would be away. So the parameters have completely changed because technology has taken over so much that it's, and then again, of course, if you've got a good producer, a good engineer who knows about the kit, and of course the role of the producer and the engineer now are very, very much intertwined, because most producers know how to use Pro Tools and know how to use the DAWs, which they didn't used to know. So the role of the producer and the engineer, if you like, are very, very much intertwined. But yeah, I mean, you can do anything you want. There's no longer a barrier. It's just sad that a lot of really talented people, I mean, cream always rises to the top, of course it does, but it's also sad that there are a lot of manufactured people out there who aren't able to maintain it. It comes down a lot these days to being in the right place at the right time, seeing the right people. I mean, it's always been that way, but again, back in the day, when I worked with bands like T-Rex, who were Tyrannosaurus Rex, I mean, I did 3 albums with Tyrannosaurus Rex before they came T-Rex, and they were funded by the record companies. And the record companies, say with David Bowie, Bowie had a couple of albums out before he had a hit. People would give advances, they would back the artist because they had faith in them. You've got the reverse now. You've got to go to the record company, in inverted commas, and give them the finished track with everything done, so that all they've got to do is put it on Spotify or iTunes or whatever it might be. They want the job done for them. There's no support for artists anymore. There's absolutely no support. And what's happened these days is, where the manufactured artists don't make it, artists make money by performing. They don't make money by making records, because you get bugger all out of iTunes. I think I was talking to an artist the other day, a guy called John Verity, who Russell knows, who his dad knew, and he'd written a song, and it had got 170,000 plays, I think, or 170,000 downloads on iTunes or something, and he got 30 quid out of it, which is absolutely ridiculous, absolutely insane. So artists can't make money out of it. What you can do is you can build a name so that people will come and see you, and that's the way that you make your money. And actually, again, I'm quite friendly with Radiohead a few years back, because they bought one of my consoles, and they're a very savvy bunch, and they were one of the first people, if you remember, who gave their album away. And everybody said, God, Radiohead, they're just giving their album away. This is ridiculous. They said, pay what you want. You can have it for free, or pay what you think it's worth. So clever, because what actually people did is, I'm not a Radiohead fan, but I'll download the album. It's free. Actually, this is quite good. Where are Radiohead playing? So they go and spend 70 quid on a ticket to go and see them at a gig. Yeah. And that's how the band make their money, because they make a lot of money by touring. So the shift, the emphasis is completely changed these days. It's all about artists performing. It's all about live. And thank goodness it is, really, because those 1-minute wonders that have been manufactured, of course, can't necessarily perform on stage to the same degree. Although, of course, these days, again, you can run the backing tracks in. Who knows what's been live and what hasn't? But that is the point. The bands these days, you talk to any band, they make their money out of touring and performing. They don't make their money out of recording.
Brilliant, thank you, man. We got another question from Facebook, from Bernie. Was it difficult to keep it a secret that the Beatles were recording at Trident?
No, I don't think. No. We were lucky, really, because we were sort of in the back, Soho. People didn't know where we were, because they would come at, quite late at night, and you could park in Wardour Street and just jump out. And, you know, if you had a Mac on your, you know, something over your head or a baseball cap, whatever, you know, the door was quite close by, so people didn't find out. There were groups of people outside. Obviously, they did get, you know, quite a few, but it wasn't mobbed as such. And I think it was over about 4 days that the recording was done, 4 or 5 days, no longer than that, and managed to keep it, you know, fairly secretive. Yeah, there were no issues on that side of it.
Yeah. Okay. And we got another question. This is, hi, I'm the owner of Tony Visconti's original Trident B range console.
Yeah.
He mentions installing it with you in his autobiography. What do you remember about those days? And that is,
Philip. Yeah. Tony had a B range to start with. Then he had a TSM at Good Earth Studios, and I remember going to his house in Clapham. No, not Clapham. Anyway, it was around that sort of area where the anyway, it doesn't matter. It was just West London, and I remember going to Tony's house and virtually sort of having a chat with him. And within 10 minutes, we closed the deal to buy the console, you know. And then Tony, bless his heart, he had a Trident B range first of all, and then he had a TSM in his studio at Good Earth, you know. And we've been friends sort of ever since. I saw Tony just before Christmas, actually, in November at Kingston University, because he's that's where I was born, Kingston upon Thames, and Tony has the Visconti studio there at Kingston University. So yeah, I mean, they were really good days. They were very good days, I have to say, generally, you know. And little did we know, if you'd said to me that these consoles would still be being used, you know, 30, 40 years on, you know, I mean, we built them to last, but you know, one of the things that I'm so proud about is that the consoles, you know, the legacy of the consoles is greater than the legacy from the studios, because there's been more hit records recorded on a Trident console than just about anything else, almost, apart from SSLs, perhaps. You know, I was watching a video, the Amy Winehouse film, and there she is in New York recording Back to Black, and she's in this little studio with Mark Ronson, and she's recording on a Trident Series 65 console, you know, and it's got, you know, yeah. And then there was the Beach Boys sitting in front of an A range talking about Brian Johnson sitting in front of an A range talking about, you know, the Beach Boys legacy. Amazing stuff, absolutely amazing, you know.
Yeah, the first time I ever used a Trident console, it was the B range, and they had one at Mono Valley Studios in Monmouth.
Yes,
and
yes.
And that one then went to Cardiff, which turned out to be Faster Studios, which the Monastery Preachers own that studio. And I remember when I was doing an album there before, I just known it as the Reggae Desk, because it just, everything was just like really vibrant colors and stuff. And it was like, right, okay, I've used SSLs before, but now I'm using a Trident. I was looking at the faders going, oh my God, man, this is just like madness. But it's
funny because I mean, I met, I actually went to see James Dean Bradfield with Russell, but I'd met James before that at, again, one of the awards ceremonies in London, the Music Producers Guild, and I was with a friend of mine, Dave Eringer, who produces The Who. He's done recent stuff with The Who, and Roger Daltrey, and he's a friend of mine, and we were at these awards, and James walked past, and I said, oh, I'm quite a fan of the Manics. I said, I've never met James, you know, it's really nice, could you introduce me? So he pulled James over, and he said, oh, hi James, you know, because Dave had produced the Manics, he produced a couple of their albums, and he said, oh, James is my friend Malcolm, and James sort of said, oh, okay, and went to walk away, and then David turned around and said, oh, and Malcolm designed your console, the TSM. And James did a complete double track. He came back and he said, you designed the TSM console? You built that console? I said, yeah. And he went, oh my God, you've been a major influence on my life. And to have someone like that say that to me, and it turns out they won't get rid of that console. They will not get rid of that console. And I went to see him with Russell, I think it was December 2018, something like that. And James said, no, and it's looking quite battered now. I've got pictures of me with James at the studio. It's looking quite battered, but he said, no, we won't get rid of it. It's part of our sound. We do all our albums on it. And it's great, when you get things like that. Absolutely fantastic, absolutely. Makes it all worthwhile. And that's why I still design equipment. I still build stuff. I make equipment for bass players at the moment. I'm making stuff under the Basics brand. We do a preamp system for bass players. And I've got a moving fader system that I do to retrofit Tridents and SSL consoles that turns them into a DAW controller. So yeah, lots of keeps me busy, keeps me active, still enjoy.
You'll never stop, Malcolm. You'll never stop making and designing. Okay, so we got 2 questions on here. Have you considered opening a museum for the Trident Studios legacy?
Well, I think we should. I do agree with that. I can't say too much at the moment, to be honest with you. Let's just say that the Trident legacy will be coming to the fore, hopefully in the not too distant future. And I can't really say any more than that, but you can read into it whatever you want. Brilliant. Very exciting. One of the reasons I saw Tony Visconti before Christmas. And I really can't say any more than that, but there's some exciting news due out in the not too distant future.
Yeah, and I'm sure that will be all on the track pages and stuff.
He's just blown it. No, he's just blown it. We have a film coming out. Brilliant. We're not supposed to talk about it. And Russell's gone, we have a film coming out. Well done, Russell.
Okay,
I'm not gonna take any blame for that. This is being recorded, and you can see that I did not let the cat out of the bag. But now you mention it, Russell. Yes, that's what we're working on, and it's going to be really exciting. Because there's such a story to tell.
Yeah,
there really is such a story.
Cool.
Because we discovered Queen. I mean, things like that. I mean, Freddie Mercury used to play at our Christmas parties. He used to come along and play piano at our Christmas parties. And I used to rehearse in my empty. When I was making the consoles, Queen used to come up and shuffle past me when I was leaving at 6 o'clock in our first factory in North London, and they would go up to rehearse. And I sold John Deacon one of the Trident 65 consoles. He was a lovely guy, John, really, really nice guy. Yeah. And in fact, I designed a console for Queen. A console called the Flexi Mix was actually designed for Queen because they were having a problem on tour getting the right console for live sound. They wanted subgroups on the console, and you couldn't buy a live sound console with subgroups. So I designed the Flexi Mix for them so that you could put any module anywhere within the frame and it would still work. So you could have 4 inputs, 2 outputs, 6 inputs, 2 outputs, and whatever. And that console got used on the first Chorus Line, Cats, and Evita musicals. It was the first console that they used on those because it gave the sound designer, sound engineer, the ability to have subgroups that he could control in blocks, and no other console would do it because they could just mix and match the modules. And that came about. That came about from Queen, meeting with Queen and talking to them about what their needs were. Yeah,
that's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, Malcolm. Okay, what is your favorite microphone for all purposes?
A U67.
Yeah.
A U67. That's what I was brought up on, I mean, at Trident, we only had U67s, and I mean, there were valve mics. U67s, we had some AKG, D19s. But I mean, the U67 is ubiquitous. You can just use it anywhere, and it sounds great. Mm-hmm. And of course, we had that fantastic Bechstein piano at Trident as well. That legendary piano. But U67 we go-to mic. Cost you about 7 or 8 grand now, but they were the only mics in those. Again, when I engineered at Trident, we had an 8-track recorder, 2 EMT metal plates. Yeah. The big, huge boxes with fixed delays on them, and I think 2 LA2A, 2 Universal Audio LA2As, and I think that's pretty much it. That was it. That was our arsenal of equipment, And I love
it. Are online, Malcolm. So from the pictures online, you had the desk, and then wasn't the processing units all above the desk?
Oh, that was a much later picture. That was
right.
Yeah. That the one where the woods sort of quite squirrely? That
Yes.
was the A-Rain. Yeah, that was when the studio got revamped. That was that was probably late 70s, early 80s.
Right. Okay.
A long time down the line. But I'm talking about, if you look at the early pictures of me sitting behind a console at Trident Studios around 68, if you look on the side of the wall, there was a patch bay, a couple of LA-2As. I think there was a Universal Audio 176, something like that. There were no external microphones or anything like that. As I say, just a couple of compressors and the 2 EMT plates that had remote control, so you could change the reverb time, and that was it. If we wanted tape delay, we just send it back through a tape machine, get slap back echo.
Yeah.
It was, and of course all the machines were in another room as well. So you spoke to a guy on the telephone and said to him, run it back or drop it into record, and you had to hope that he put the right tracks into record.
Madness.
Absolutely. I've got a question here. Tape or digital for sound quality? That's an interesting question. You see. And I love that question as well, tape or digital, because you think I'm going to say tape, don't you? And I'm not. Again, this is one of the sort of fallacies of the day. Tape was the biggest pain in the backside, that we ever had, because it was the weakest link in the chain, and it's one of the main reasons why digital recording came about. It wasn't to digitize consoles were fine. It was the recording medium, because what happened was that, and I can't tell you how many times you get a lovely sound in the control room, you record it and you play it back and you go, well, it doesn't sound the same as it did when it was coming out of the monitors when we were recording it. And Tony in particular used to notice this. He'd say, Mal, it's not right, the playback. And it would be the tape machine. So you'd have to realign the tape machine or play around with it or whatever. It might have gone out of alignment or whatever. But you never truly got back what you put onto tape. And of course, we were doing a lot of track bouncing. We were having to mix tracks together. And every time you did that, not only did you get noise, but when you did a track bounce, you had to come off the record head, because otherwise you got a delay, because the record and the replay head were spaced apart. So if you came off the replay head and then recorded back onto the record head, there'd be an inch or so, and it would be like a delay. So what they did is they had what's called cell sync or synchronization. So for those times when you were doing a drop-in, for example, you had to have all the tracks on sync. So they would come off the record head, and then you'd record on another record head. So you'd have like 6 of your record heads playing back, 6 of the tracks of the record head playing back, and say track 7 will be in record. So you could record your vocal on track 7, okay? But when you did a track bounce, which is when you wanted to say, okay, we want to take tracks 1, 2, and 3 and put them onto track 5 to create space, when you came off the sync head, or when it was played back off the record head, it was fine just for monitoring, but it didn't sound good. The EQ was wrong because it was a different type of head and you couldn't equalize it. So you always, the more you track bounce, the thinner the sound got. So you had all these losses, you'd get a thinner sound. So you had to almost, what you do is you'd equalize the mix when you were track bouncing to compensate for the loss that you knew you'd get. And that came about just by knowing your machine, knowing the studio, knowing how it worked. And it was, it was really seat of your pants to see if you get it right. And in the end, you kind of developed a technique for doing it. So tape was an absolute pain. And of course, you got more noise as well when you transferred across. I opened my own studio. I moved down to Devon 20 odd years ago. And one of the things I did is I thought, right, I haven't engineered for years. I'm going to open my own studio up. So I got hold of one of my consoles, bought back one of my consoles and opened a studio in my basement of my house and got a lot of local bands in. And one of the first things I did was I thought, right, how am I going to record? What am I going to use? And DAWs had only just started to come in then. It was about 2001, something like that. And I got hold of a Mackie HDR 2496, which some of the viewers might know, and it was basically a 24-track machine in a box in a 3U, I think it was, or 4U rack, and it had a remote and it operated just like a tape machine. You could drop tracks in, everything else. It was absolutely fantastic because for the first time I heard exactly back what I was recording. It was like opening a window. It was like, that's exactly what I've put down onto tape, or onto the hard drive. And you could drop in, you got no clicks, you got no problems with bouncing, the noise generation wasn't there. I have to say that I prefer digital over analog in terms of recording. You can argue about the compression that tape gives you and this bottom end and the saturation and all of this stuff, and maybe it does, but to me, the trade-off is too great for those advantages. I prefer, personally, to get back off tape or the recording medium exactly what I'm putting in. I don't want any surprises. I don't want the bottom end to be slightly brighter coming off tape than it is during the recording. I've engineered that sound to be like it is coming out of the speakers. I want that sound to come back off tape, in inverted commas, coming back off the replay medium. I don't want to get a surprise, you know. So no, digital for me every time. The perfect marriage is an analog front end. I'm going to say that, I know, but an analog front end and a digital recording. That's the perfect mix between the two. It really is. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Brilliant. Right.
Okay, so we got 2 more questions on here, Malcolm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Who was the better singer to record in the Beatles? Ooh, I don't think there's an answer to that. I don't think that's one you can really. No, I don't think you can really say about that. I mean, I think they were all, you know, they were all much, you know, yeah, all on a par, really. I don't think. Ringo, nice one. They all, you know, they could all sing. I mean, that was an incredible thing. You know, they were all so professional. You know, there was, you didn't sort of think about it in those terms. Who was the better? Who was this? Who was that? You kind of got on and did it, and they were all just great to work with. You know,
yeah.
I mean, Elton John was great to work with. You know, I spent a day with Elton John at his house once, putting in some hi-fi for him when he just got his first house in Wentworth. And Barry Sheffield said, "Oh, Reggie's just moved into his first big house. Can you wire up some speakers for him?" So I went over there at 9 o'clock in the morning, and Reg answered the door to me in his dressing gown. And I went in there and I wired up these speakers for him. And we needed a couple of jack plugs. So he jumped in my car and we drove down to Virginia Water to a hi-fi shop to buy some jack plugs. And we chatted about cars and things on the way. And we got into this hi-fi shop, and obviously Reg had bought a couple of televisions from them. This is like 1971, 72. And Reg had just bought some speakers, and his guy's eyes lit up. "Oh, Mr. Dwight, oh, nice to see you, blah, 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 blah." We bought these jack plugs, went home, and I finished off doing the wiring, and his sister, who moved in to help him, made me a sandwich. And later on in the afternoon, I was just about to go, and he said, "Oh, thanks, Malcolm, thanks ever so much for doing that." And he got his checkbook out, and he wrote me a check on Rocket Records for 30 quid, for £30, as a thank you. And which in those days, I mean, a week and a half's wages, and like giving somebody, I don't know, £500-600. And he gave me this check on Rocket Records signed by R. Dwight. And of course, I never kept the check, did I? You know, people say, "Oh, you know, you should have kept the check," but you don't think. Again, I didn't know that Elton John was going to be famous 50 years, you know, 30 years, 40 years on, you know. But they're just great stories, and, you know, great times. And we drove down talking about cars and stuff, you know, because he just bought an Aston Martin. I'd sold mine, and, you know, we were just chatting about things like that. He was a really nice guy, really nice guy. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
It's crazy to think, isn't it? You know, how many amazing acts come from that studio, isn't it?
Yes,
you know,
it is. What Genesis, you know, there are very few bands of that ilk. Even the Stones recorded there. There were virtually no bands of any consequence that didn't at some time do something at Trident. And there are a lot of bands, you know, who had their best records recorded at Trident. You know, like David Bowie's Space Oddity, the album and the single. And I was fortunate enough to work on the album. You know, so yeah, I mean, amazing times, and we didn't know then that we were sort of writing a bit of history. Didn't even think about it. You know.
Yeah. Okay, so I have a question by you, Malcolm. Expanding on getting the sound right at first, can you go into depth about this? For example, do you tend to use the same placement technique over multiple sessions, or do you try and experiment each time?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. I can't see where that one is actually. Is that?
It'd be under ask a question.
Yeah, I've got it. I've got loads of questions down the side. I was trying to find it about training kits, but anyway. So basically saying, do I use the same approach every time, or do I experiment? Is that right? Is that sort of it, or?
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't find it somewhere.
Yeah, that was it.
Yeah, but yeah, I have a basic approach. Whenever I'm doing something, I will always say, okay, if it's a bass guitar, I'm probably going to DI it and put a mic up. I'll probably usually use, the same type of mic. Although I suppose with bass, actually, you can vary it a bit with bass. I mean, it could be a Shaw, 57, or it could be, could even try a D12, a bass drum mic. I mean, you experiment a bit with bass because basses can be quite different. But I would use a microphone and a DI. Excuse me. For drums, as I said earlier, I have a specific sort of approach. The first thing is to listen to the drums and get them in tune and get them to sound right. There's no point in putting up mics until you know the drums sound the way that they should. And as an engineer, excuse me, you get your ears tuned to knowing how an instrument should sound in the studio, because you know the studio's acoustics and you know how a good drum sounds in that studio. So when you get a new fresh drum kit in there, you tune that kit to to the way that you want it to sound. Sorry, I'm just going to go off at a slight tangent. Another anecdote here, interesting anecdote about recording drums, is that I was working with Tony Visconti in the studios years ago, and I'd just done a big orchestral session in the morning, loads and loads of musicians. In those days you had these, string players and horn players. You had about 30 people would come in to do a recording, and we ran out of mics. There was a very famous session drummer around at that time called Clem Catini, and he did loads of sessions. And these guys were in constant demand. They were going all around the studios. And I just done all of this session, and I really was down to 3 mics on the drums, an overhead mic, snare drum, and a bass drum mic. And Norman Sheffield's Ludwig drum kit was in the studio set up. And Clem noticed this, and he came into the studio and said, "Oh," he said, "I'm sorry, running a bit late. I've got the car outside. Do you mind if I use the house drum kit?" So I said, "Sure, no problem." So I put up the mics, overhead, U67 overhead, SM54 on the snare, and a D12 on the bass drum, and got him to just do a run through. Sounded fantastic. Recorded it. Everybody went home. Tony came in the afternoon. Same drum kit was in there, set up, and I forget who the band was. And even if I could remember, I wouldn't mention them. And he said, "Can we use? Yeah, you've got the drum kit set up. Can we use it?" We took 3 hours trying to get a drum sound.
No.
3 hours trying to get a drum sound. The reason being that one of the reasons why these session drummers were so much in demand is they knew exactly how the kit should sound to the engineer. And these guys could hit a snare drum exactly the same every time, with the same velocity, with the same sound on exactly the same part of the drum, so that you never got a change. You never missed a beat. It wasn't one beat louder than another, and so you didn't need a lot of mics. And he knew also if the drum wasn't quite in tune, or it was a little bit flabby or whatever, he knew how to play that drum specifically to give you the right sound. So again, yes, of course, it is down to tuning. I'm saying this. It is down to tuning. You need to put, tape on them. I think there are special gels you can get now for drums. You need to listen to it. But of course, a lot of it is also down to the player. If the player can't hit the drum in the right place all the time, and it is the drums that you get most problems with when you're recording live instruments. It is the one you get most problems with because, it's more than one instrument. It's 5 instruments in one, or 4 instruments in one, whatever it might be. And they've all got their different requirements and their sounds and their timbres and everything else. You add cymbals into that mix and you've got a lot of different things to cope with. So what you do is you work out something that works for you. It's as simple as that. You work out something that works for you and you keep it simple. Keep it simple. I've seen engineers that before they do anything, they start to compress. No, my edict with all of this stuff is let the instrument talk to you. Listen to the instrument, listen to what it's telling you, and then you know what the instrument needs after that, and you can bring that to the instrument. But if the instrument isn't talking to you in the right way, you need to adjust that instrument to talk to you in the right way, so that that bass amp now is giving you the sort of sound that you want. It's not too flabby, it's not too topping, it's not, and again, it fits in with the song. It's all about using your common sense. But I have a general approach. I won't go in and just say, all right, I'll just use different mics today. I have a set idea that I will use pencil mics for overheads. I'll use something like a good dynamic mic, a Shaw or AKG or whatever it might be for the snare. Always use a D12 or a specific bass drum mic, and then go from there. I might use dynamics on the toms, or I might use a condenser. Just depends, experiment a little bit with that, because my mind's still open as far as things like toms are concerned, as to what's better, even now, as to what's better, whether it's a condenser or it's a dynamic. It's all about just experimenting, and it's all, you have to know what the patterns are on the mics and things like that, but it's all about feel. It's all about just getting a feel for the whole thing. It really is. But an interesting question. Yeah.
What about your guitar amps, Malcolm? What's your sort of go-to microphone when you're miking up guitar amp?
Usually probably a condenser, funnily enough. Probably use a fairly decent condenser. I mean, the thing nowadays is you can buy really good condenser mics for very little money. £70 or £80 buys you a good condenser mic. And the difference between a £70 or £80 condenser mic and one costing £500 is very, very small in comparison to the difference in the cost. And I do get rather, there's a lot of people on these forums who spend so much time talking about, I could hear the difference in that. There was a Lundell transformer in that console instead of a Marinair transformer, and I could hear the difference. No, you bloody well couldn't. I'm sorry. And it's mindless and pointless, and just showing that you actually, aren't concentrating on the things that you should be concentrating on. Because as I said before, if you get the first part of the chain right, you could be recording on a cassette deck or a DAW. The difference that you get at the end of it is marginal in comparison to getting everything else right. So whether you spend £100 on a microphone or £1,000 or £5,000 on a microphone, the difference that you will hear in a mix with that track won't warrant the difference in the cost. It's as simple as, I guarantee it won't. It's if you've got the money to spend, of course, spend the money, and if you're confident of having that kind of equipment. I'm not saying you shouldn't go and spend money on equipment, but I'm saying is you don't have to. You don't have to.
What I find really inspiring with that, Malcolm, is that you've got this simple recording approach, which is really cool, and it's sort of making you thinking about the instruments and the performers. So absolutely. I imagine everyone who went in the studio with you back in the 60s and the 70s would have walked into that room, and you would have had them recording quite quickly, because you would have been like, working to their sounds rather than spending hours and hours with hundreds of mics.
This is the whole thing about the ethos of a recording engineer. When I do, because I'm a visiting professor at Leeds College of Music, so I talk to the students and whatever. I'm also on the mentoring board at West London University, and I talk to students there. And what I say to people is that, look, when you go to a recording studio, when somebody goes into a commercial recording studio, it's a very alien world for an artist, and it's not a world that they necessarily feel at home in, and you can feel very intimidated if you're not careful. So the role of the engineer, very much to me, is to make people feel at home. And what I love to do is have a joke and a laugh with people, to make sure, that they're feeling comfortable, they're feeling relaxed, they're not feeling tensed anymore, and make sure they've got a good headphone balance. That's the main thing that an engineer should do, is make sure their headphones are good. Because if they've got a good headphone balance and they sound good in their headphones, they're going to feel a lot more confident. If they don't have a good headphone mix and things aren't in there that they want, and the engineer isn't responsive to that, you start to feel that you're out of control. So it's all about making the artist feel relaxed. And yes, getting them there as quickly as possible, because we all know that the 10th take is never as good as the first take. That's a given in anything. So you've got to get the performance out of them very early on, and therefore you've got to make sure that you've also got the sound very early on. You can't say, can you just keep doing that? Can you keep doing another take because I haven't got the set, not happy with the drum sound? You can't do that. You have to get it right to start with, and know that when you hit that button, everybody's going to be happy. It's so much common sense, and it is about making people feel comfortable. I always say, somebody goes into a studio, a songwriter, it's their hopes, their dreams, their aspirations, it's their baby that needs cradling, and you're delivering that baby, if you like, and you can either deliver it properly, or you can mess it up. And it is a similar sort of analogy. You have to understand that that's what you're doing. There's a lot of engineers who can be quite aloof, who don't sort of come across to clients, in a friendly sort of manner, Just treat them like, oh, you don't know what you're doing, I know what I'm doing. Just put your drums there, put your guitar there, I'll do this, I'll do that, you know. And you don't sort of question me. It's all about how you set the tone of the session in the first place. And my attitude has always been to make people feel comfortable. It's as simple as that, you know. Yeah.
And that's a trait I think that is overlooked quite a lot as well. You know, that if you're an engineer, if you're a producer, if you're an artist, that you really want to be successful in the industry, then, you know, having these skills that you can communicate really well with other people, and, you know, and know when to sort of learning personalities, really, isn't it, within that studio environment?
I mean, this is what I always, you know, I say to people, look, just think about it for a minute, okay? We don't make anything. We don't produce anything, right? I could go into my garage, shed, workshop, whatever it might be, and I can make a table, okay? And you never see me, and you judge me on that table, and you never met me, but, oh, that's a great table, so I think Malcolm Toft's a great table maker, right? Yeah. We're not in that world. We don't make anything. What we make, in inverted commas, ends up on a USB stick or on a hard drive, or it's in the ethos. It's in the ether somewhere. It's out there. You know, it's not a non-material thing. So you are judged on that, that product, on that song. So it's a completely different approach. You cannot be shy and retiring. You know, I could go and make that table for you in my workshop and be the most miserable bloke in the world, you know, doesn't want to speak to anybody, is very rude, but it doesn't matter because the table's great. But we're not in that world. We're dealing with people with very important things, their dreams, their hopes, their aspirations, you know. And so we've got to remember that, and we've got to cradle that, and we've got to get the best for them and the best out of them. And that's always the way that I work. And I think that's why, you know, Tony and I worked well. He knew that we worked on a level. We worked together, not because of my professional ability, but because we got on well as people. And he trusted me. That was the important thing, to trust.
Yeah, and you've got to be a people's person. So everyone now, if you want to be successful, be a people's person.
Well, we do. In our industry, you have to be a people person. You have to be, you know. I mean, I've met students who come up to me and they go, you know, I've just, you know, I know everything about Pro Tools, and I've learned I can do absolutely everything. And they won't even look you in the face. And you sort of go, you're not going to make it. You know, it doesn't matter how good you are. You know, you could probably work out algorithms in your head, you know, and be the best editor, whatever it might be. But if you can't communicate and look people in the face, in the eye, you know, and get their trust, you're not in this industry. It's a people industry. Absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Brilliant. Well, I think it sort of leads on to like the last question that me and Grant. So I want to pull Grant back in for this. Basically, how did you get involved with Tract? You know, I think Russell touched on it a little bit earlier on and stuff. And how important do you think this app is for songwriters, musicians, and budding record producers?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great. I mean, to see something like, I mean, if you'd said to me, you know, even 30 years ago, you'd have something on your phone to record 4-track or 8-track or whatever, I'd have said, you know, get out of here. This is sci-fi stuff. I mean, we never, you know, I mean, God Almighty, even to take photos on your phone, you know, it would have been amazing. So it's an incredible step forward. What it does, of course, as I said earlier, I touched on that word democratize, and that's what it does. I mean, you know, music has become so much more democratized, and it does mean that people are now able to create far more freely. And, you know, by being able to just wake up, you know, middle of the night. I mean, you know, it's a famous thing, I think, you know, Ronnie Wood or Keith Richards once said, you know, when he was doing Brown Sugar or something like that, he woke up in the middle of the night and was struggling to find a cassette deck because he'd got this riff in his mind, you know, to put down. He couldn't find it. But if you've got a phone with that app on it, you can put down your, you know, your scratchings, your musings instantly. So it's a great thing. And I think, I think that it's I was very impressed, you know, with the work that that Russell put into it. And of course, it's, you know, kind of like almost ironic coming back that, you know, this is like Trident Studios, one of the first 8 tracks, you know, 4-track, 8 tracks. On there. And to be able to do that, and then to be able to share the way that you can. And of course, in lockdown, it's been absolutely brilliant to be able to do it. So anything that, you know, promotes the making of music and the creating of music, only got to be a good thing, And I think it's one of the, I wouldn't get involved in it if I didn't think it was it's a good idea. And from what I've seen of it and the way that it works, it's an incredible feat to have got it this far. And, I think it's good. I can't see how anybody, if you're a musician or a writer or whatever it might be, why you wouldn't want this. It's as simple as that. I mean, why would you not want it?
And one of the biggest things for me, Malcolm, is that the fact that, okay, you can get your idea down on this app. You can also get your lyrics down on this app. But the collaborational option of, okay, I'm a musician, I'm stuck in Porthcawl in South Wales, and but I can collaborate with a drummer from LA, a bass player from India. I can find a variety of vocalists from all over the world to collaborate and put these ideas together. But not only that now, which that's amazing in itself, but also now the opportunities that there's competitions that you can put your songs onto, and like how amazing is all this? Like the guy now who's just won that competition has just been signed by Dave Stewart's record label, Bay Street Records. So
because Dave's involved in it, isn't it? Well, so
so it's amazing. It's really it's great, and it's and just to sort of wrap up as well. Thank you so much for doing this, Malcolm. And I'm sure if everyone in the chat room could sort of give you a little clap, they would. But no, it's great, absolutely great to have you on today.
I've enjoyed it. I love. I'm just so pleased to have been involved in all of this. For the years that I was, and it's been over 50 years now in the industry, and I'm still sort of going strong, hopefully, and still, passing on the legacy. And if I can, pass that on and help people, then that's what I enjoy doing.
And I think what would be an amazing thing, Grant, as well, is that maybe at the end of this whole series, once the next version of Tract gets released and stuff, then maybe we could pull Malcolm back in for another talk like this, because I feel as if there's so much more we could have discussed. So if you're willing to come back again, Malcolm, we will definitely have you back.
Absolutely. I love it. I love talking to people. It's one of the reasons why I do my sort of bit of lecturing and stuff like that, because people don't have access to this anymore. I'm from a bygone age, if you like, and a lot of people, this thing about the longevity that artists didn't have, that's something that today's generation just don't understand, and quite rightly so. I'm not criticizing in any way, shape or form. It's just, of course, the fact that when you look at an artist today, you think nothing of the fact that they're going to be around in the next 10, 15 years, blah blah blah. The Ed Sheerans of this world, he's probably got a career that will span 30 or 40 years. What people don't understand, quite rightly, is the fact that when we were pioneering in those days, nobody had that lifespan like that, and I didn't think I'd still be doing it after all this time. I didn't think there'd still be a place for me. And that's one of the nice things, that there still is a place for us old timers, us old codgers, But I enjoy it. I enjoy passing it on, because I could only pass on an experience that people would never have. And I'm just so glad I was around at that time, because it was truly absolutely amazing. I was right in the middle of everything in the 60s, absolutely amazing.
Fantastic. It's inspiring hearing from you today, Malcolm. And just a couple of things just to sort of finish up. Thank you to Russell, the CEO of Tract, Grant as well, for sort of co-organizing this. And and I strongly recommend, guys, you go and check out the All About Recording, Malcolm Toft. It is brilliant. I've gone on it and it's absolutely fantastic. There's some great information on there. And also, go and download the app if you haven't, guys. You're silly if you haven't. So go and download the Tract app. Okay, thank you very much.
Right,
do you want to
take
say
care.
Grant? Yeah.
Bye.
Okay, thank you, guys. Ta-da.
Thank you very much.